My husband and mother-in-law thought the house belonged to them when they threatened me with divorce, but now they can move in together and continue their unhealthy relationship because the house was my inheritance. I'm Katie, a 30-year-old office worker who somehow ended up in a situation worthy of a TV sitcom. I'm a hard-working woman. That's me. Married to a man who is still tied to his mother's apron strings. That's my husband, Gary, and I have a mother-in-law who thinks she's the Queen of England. I know what you're thinking. Katie, dear, why did you marry a mama's boy? Well, let me tell you, love makes you blind, deaf, and apparently stupid. When I met Gary in college, he seemed like a dream come true. Tall, handsome, and capable of forming complete sentences, which was something of a rarity in the wild jungle of higher education. A few years later, here I am, living in a beautiful $2 million house with my husband and our daughter, a house I inherited from my father. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Well, buckle up, because this is where things get interesting. You see, my dear husband and his loving mother seem to be under the impression that this beautiful, spacious house, worth every penny of those $2 million, was somehow thanks to Gary's hard work and his mother's impeccable taste. But before I reveal the juicy details of how I pulled off the scam of the century, let me take you through the hilarious, frustrating, and frankly absurd events that led to the moment when I finally dropped the most epic truth bomb of all. I was a bright-eyed college student full of expectations when I met Gary. Armed with nothing but a dream, a stack of textbooks, and an unhealthy addiction to cafeteria coffee, Gary entered my life like a knight in shining armor, if that armor had been made of football shirts and beer cans. Our eyes met in a crowded classroom, and it was love at first sight. Okay, fine, it wasn't that romantic. He actually spilled his energy drink all over my notes, and I may have said a few words that would have made a sailor blush. But hey, nothing says true love like ruined notes and sticky fingers. From that moment on, we were inseparable. The first sign of Gary's unusual relationship with his mother came on our third date. Picture the scene: candlelit dinner, soft music, the two of us gazing lovingly into each other's eyes. Suddenly, Gary's phone rings. He ignores it like any sensible person on a date would, right? No. Our Gary practically dives across the table to answer it. "Hi, Mom," he says with all the excitement of a Labrador seeing its owner after 5 minutes apart. What followed was a 15-minute conversation about whether he had remembered to pack his lucky underwear for exam week. I wish I were joking. I truly do. Did I run for the hills like any self-respecting woman would? No. I sat there drinking my cheap, lukewarm wine thinking, how sweet, he loves his mom. Past Katie, if I could go back in time and slap some sense into you, I would. Hard. The years passed, and suddenly we were engaged. How did that happen, you ask? Well, let's just say it involved a hidden ring, a badly delivered proposal speech that mentioned his mother no fewer than 5 times, and me, in my infinite wisdom, saying yes. The wedding planning phase was an experience, and by experience, I mean a nightmare sprinkled with passive-aggressive comments from my future mother-in-law. This, my friends, was where Carol really began to shine. Every decision, from the color of the napkins to the flavor of the cake, had to receive Carol's approval. God forbid we chose lilac instead of lavender for the bridesmaids' dresses. Carol nearly had an aneurysm over it. And Gary? Well, he was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Every time I tried to ask for his opinion on something, he would shrug and say, "Whatever you and Mom think is best, honey." I should have realized then that I wasn't just marrying Gary. I was entering a polygamous relationship with him and his mother. But the real fun began when we started house hunting. Most couples look for a house together, maybe bringing along a real estate agent or a trusted friend for a second opinion. Not us. That would have been far too normal. We brought Carol. The final blow came when we eventually found a house that we all approved of. And by we all, I mean Carol gave it her blessing, and I was too exhausted to keep arguing. While we were standing in the living room, Carol turned to Gary with tears in her eyes and said, "Oh, sweetheart, I can already see our family gathered here on Christmas morning. Our family, not your family. Ours." I was standing right there, and somehow I had already been erased from the picture. Did Gary correct her? Of course not. He just nodded, probably imagining himself in barefoot pajamas opening presents, while his beloved mommy watched him with sparkling eyes. By now, you're probably wondering why I didn't run away. Believe me, I've asked myself that question approximately 37,042 times since then. But love, sleep deprivation from endless house viewings, and the sunk cost fallacy are a dangerous combination. So, against all better judgment and probably several laws of nature, we got married. The wedding was, well, let's just say that if you looked up the word circus in the dictionary, you would find a picture of our wedding party. Carol wore white. Yes, you read that correctly. White. To her son's wedding. When I pointed it out to Gary, he just shrugged and said, "Mom says it's more of an off-white." Seriously? Off-white, my ass. It was whiter than a polar bear in a snowstorm. But we made it through. We said our I do's, cut the cake, and embarked on our new life together. And by together, I mean with Carol's constant presence lurking in the background. You might think that once we were married and settled into our new house, the one Carol had chosen, remember, things would calm down. No, married life with Gary was like running a three-legged race, except the third leg belonged to Carol, and she was constantly trying to trip me. She was everywhere. If she wasn't physically present, she was there in spirit, living rent-free inside Gary's head and dictating every aspect of our lives. Want to buy a new couch? Better consult Carol first. Thinking about trying a new recipe for dinner? Nope. Gary only likes food the way his mother makes it. Want to paint the guest room? Slow down, young lady. Carol might not like that color combination. Before I knew it, I was pregnant. Most women get to enjoy their pregnancies. They have baby showers, decorate the nursery, and bask in the glow of impending motherhood. I got to enjoy Carol's constant comments about everything I ate, drank, or did. Apparently, when you're carrying precious little Gary Jr., you're no longer capable of making decisions for yourself. Oh, Katie, should you really be drinking coffee? I never touched that garbage when I was pregnant with Gary. Well, maybe that explains how Gary turned out. Then it was, Katie dear, are you sure you want to paint the nursery that color? Studies show it could affect the baby's cognitive development. Again, it seemed like Gary might have tasted some of that paint himself, and Gary nodded along with everything his mother said. I swear, if Carol had told him that standing on his head and singing I'm a Little Teapot would guarantee a healthy baby, he would have been upside down singing nursery rhymes before you could say umbilical cord. The day I went into labor was quite an experience. I was huffing and puffing, trying not to curse every man on the planet, and guess who walked into the delivery room? Carol. Gary had called her before he called the hospital. I'm not joking. His first instinct when his wife went into labor was to call his mommy. I'd say I was surprised, but by then I was far too busy trying to give birth to Care. There I was, bringing a new life into the world, with my husband on one side looking like he might faint at any moment, and my mother-in-law on the other offering pearls of wisdom like, now Katie, when I gave birth to Gary, I didn't make half that much noise. Having a baby only gave Carol more ammunition. Now I wasn't just a bad wife, I was also a bad mother. Every decision I made was wrong. I wasn't feeding the baby properly. I wasn't changing her correctly. I wasn't singing the right songs. It was an endless avalanche of criticism, all delivered with that sugary smile that made me fantasize about dropping her into a barrel of quick-drying cement. Gary was thrilled. He had his mommy and his daughter under the same roof. The fact that his wife was slowly losing her mind seemed to escape him completely. It was around this time that I realized I needed to make a change. Not for myself. Oh no, I was already too far gone. I needed to do it for my daughter. I refused to raise a little girl who thought it was normal for her father to consult his mother about every decision. I refused to let her grow up believing that her worth depended on how well she could meet her mother-in-law's impossible standards. So I did what any sensible woman would do. I changed jobs. Yes, you read that correctly. I left my well-paying, stable job with irregular hours for a position that paid less, but gave me more time at home because I was determined to be there for my daughter in a way Gary never would be. Of course, Carol had plenty to say about that decision. Oh, Katie, are you sure that's a good idea? How are you going to maintain Gary's lifestyle on that salary? As if Gary's lifestyle of playing video games and consulting his mother about which socks to wear required a six-figure income to maintain. But I stood my ground. For the first time since meeting Gary, I made a decision without considering what he or Carol might think. But don't worry, this isn't the end of the story. Oh no, we're only getting started. Remember that $2 million house I mentioned? That's where things really start to get interesting. But more on that later. For now, I need a good strong drink and possibly a lobotomy to erase the image of Carol in her off-white wedding dress from my memory. Update 1. Last time, I left you with the birth of my daughter and my brilliant decision to change jobs. Now let's fast forward a little to when things really started heating up. There we were, a happy family of 3, or 4 if you counted Carol, which Gary apparently always did. Our daughter was growing faster than Gary's mountain of dirty laundry, and we were starting to feel a little cramped in our current place. You know, the house Carol had so generously chosen for us as newlyweds. One fine morning, over a breakfast of burnt toast, my dear husband said something that almost made me choke on my charcoal-flavored crust. Honey, he said with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, I've been thinking, Mom is getting older and I'm worried about her future. What if we looked for a place where all of us could live together? Now, I pride myself on being a reasonable person. I had endured Carol's constant interference and Gary's inability to make a decision without consulting the mothership. But this was too much. I tried to reason with him. I pointed out that Carol was aging like a fine wine, full of preservatives, and would probably outlive all of us. But no, Gary was determined. He had an entire speech prepared about family values and taking care of our elders. I'm fairly certain Carol had written it for him and made him practice in front of a mirror. I was faced with a choice. Agree to live with the woman who had made it her life's mission to criticize every aspect of my existence, or become the evil daughter mother-in-law denying sweet Carol the joy of watching her granddaughter grow up. But your friend Katie isn't one to give up without a fight. So I put on my big girl pants and proposed a compromise. We would look for a house, sure, but it would be near Carol's current home, not inside it. Close enough for frequent visits, but far enough away that I could pretend the doorbell was broken whenever I needed a little sanity. Surprisingly, Gary agreed. I suspect he was simply relieved that I hadn't immediately filed for divorce, or had him committed for suggesting that we live with his mother. Now remember how I mentioned earlier that I had inherited a house from my father? Well, this is where things get interesting. You see, I hadn't told Gary about this little inheritance. Why, you ask? Partly because I knew the moment Carol found out, she would start redecorating the place in her head. But mostly because, well, I suppose I wanted something that was mine and mine alone. So I suggested we look at houses in the area where, purely by coincidence, the property I had inherited happened to be located. Gary suspected nothing. He was too busy making sure every property we viewed had a suitable room for his mother's extended stays. Eventually, we settled on a house. And when I say we settled, I mean I managed to convince Gary and Carol that the house I had inherited was on the market and perfect for us. Because of course having a bigger house didn't discourage Carol. It simply gave her more space to spread her own special brand of insanity. She began visiting constantly. At first it was once a week, then twice, then every other day. Soon, I was finding excuses to work late just to avoid coming home and finding her rearranging my cupboards or lecturing me on the correct way to fold fitted sheets. Gary was delighted. He had his mother around all the time, pampering him, cooking his favorite meals, and generally treating him like he was still a 12-year-old boy who needed his mommy to cut the crusts off his sandwiches. About 3 months after we moved in, I came home one day and found that Carol had let herself inside and was in the middle of repainting our living room. "Oh, Katie, you're home," she said cheerfully, as though breaking into someone's house and redecorating it were perfectly normal. "I hope you don't mind, but that almond color was so boring. I thought a nice mauve would bring the room to life." "Mommy, Mommy, look what Grandma gave me!" And there in my daughter's arms was the ugliest, tackiest dress I had ever seen. My daughter loved it. Looking at my mauve walls, my beaming daughter, and Carol's satisfied expression, I realized something had to change. And since throwing your mother out a window is generally frowned upon by the law, I knew the person who had to change was me. It all started with a phone call from my mom. Now let me take a moment to appreciate my mother. Compared with Carol, she's a saint. She calls me once a week, remembers my birthday without Facebook reminding her, and has never once implied that her way of loading the dishwasher is superior to mine. But this call was different. Her health and my dad's had been getting worse for some time, and things had taken a turn for the worse. They were struggling to take care of themselves and genuinely needed help. I did what any good daughter would do. I adjusted my work schedule, kissed my daughter, and prepared to divide my time between my home and my parents' home. Gary's response was exactly what you would expect. He muttered something about how difficult it would be for him to manage without me, as though he were the one balancing a job, a daughter, and 2 sick parents. He even had the nerve to suggest that maybe Carol could come and stay with us full-time to help, but I didn't have time for that. I had parents to care for, a daughter to raise, and a job to keep. So I did what women have done since the beginning of time. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and kept going. What I hadn't expected was Carol's reaction to my new schedule. You would think she would have been delighted. After all, I was out of the house more often, giving her free rein to redecorate however she wanted and pamper her precious little boy. But no. To her, the fact that I was prioritizing my own parents somehow meant I was neglecting my duties as a wife and mother. I wasn't spending enough time with my daughter. The house was messy. Gary was eating too much takeout. Everything finally exploded one night when I came home late from my parents' house, exhausted and emotionally drained, and found Carol standing in my kitchen with her lips pursed in disapproval. "Katie," she said in that sugary voice that made me want to commit serious crimes, "I think we need to talk about your priorities." And there, dear Reddit readers, I'll leave you for now, because what happened next, well, that's a story of its own. Update 2. I was standing in my kitchen, so exhausted I could barely see straight. I had spent the day juggling work calls, changing my dad's IV, and trying to convince my mom that she needed to eat something besides stale crackers and sadness. And now, here was Carol, staring at me and accusing me. What came out of my mouth was a flood of frustration, rage, and enough profanity to invent entirely new curse words. It was as though a dam had broken, and in years of bottled-up resentment came pouring out. Carol did not take it well. Her face went through more colors than a chameleon in a bag of candy. Then Gary walked in. Was he ready to defend my honor and put his mother in her place? Of course not. Gary took one look at the scene, his wife red with fury and possibly foaming at the mouth, and his precious mommy looking as though she might faint onto the nearest couch. And guess what he did? He sided with her. In the great showdown between his wife and his mother, Gary chose mommy. He started lecturing me about respect, family values, and how I was tearing the family apart with my selfish behavior. But Gary wasn't finished. Oh no, he saved the best for last. In a move I'm sure he thought was his winning card, he dropped this little gem. If you ever wanted a divorce, you and our daughter wouldn't be able to manage on your own. You understand that? Oh, sweet Gary, you had just screwed up monumentally. I started laughing. Gary and Carol stared at me as if I had finally lost my mind. And maybe I had, but in losing it, I also found something. My backbone. Once I could breathe again, I straightened up. Honey, who said I'd be the one who couldn't manage? The confusion on their faces was priceless. You could practically see the hamster wheels turning in their heads as they tried to process what I had just said. And that was when I dropped the biggest truth bomb of all. I told them everything about the house, about how it wasn't just any house, but a $2 million property that I had inherited from my father, about how every mortgage payment, every tax bill, and every repair for a leaking faucet had been paid with my money. Gary's face went from confusion to disbelief, and then to something that looked suspiciously like fear. Carol, on the other hand, went from shock to outrage before settling into a calculating kind of interest that sent chills down my spine. But I wasn't finished. I was on a roll, and nothing short of divine intervention was going to shut me up. I explained everything, how I had bitten my tongue for years, endured Carol's interference and Gary's lack of backbone, changed jobs, sacrificed my career, and bent over backward to accommodate their every whim. And for what? So they could treat me like a glorified maid in my own home? I made it very clear that things were going to change. No more surprise visits from Carol. No more redecorating without my permission. No more treating me like a charity case who should be grateful for whatever crumbs of affection they decided to give me. And as for Gary, I made it clear that he had a decision to make. He could start behaving like a husband and father, or he could pack his bags and go live with his beloved mommy, because I was done. Completely done. Predictably, Carol burst into crocodile tears. She cried that she had only ever wanted what was best for the family, and that she couldn't believe I had deceived them. How could I be so cruel to poor, sweet Gary? Gary, meanwhile, looked as though he had been hit by a truck. He stammered, stumbled over his words, and even tried to argue that surely, as my husband, he had some right to the house. I did what any sensible woman in my situation would do. I called a lawyer, the kind of lawyer who makes other lawyers wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Because if Gary thought he was going to intimidate me with threats of divorce, he had another thing coming. My lawyer assured me that not only was the house completely mine, but if Gary insisted on divorce, he would be lucky to walk away with much more than the clothes on his back. Of course, this is real life, not a movie, so things didn't magically resolve overnight. Gary, in a surprising display of survival instinct, seemed to realize just how badly he had messed up. He started talking about couples therapy, fixing things, and how much he loved me and our daughter. As for Carol, let's just say she didn't take her new status as persona non grata very well. She tried everything: emotional blackmail, love bombing, even a half-hearted attempt at an apology. But I stood my ground. My house, my rules, and my rules said no more, Carol. I realized that by standing up for myself and refusing to be a doormat any longer, I was teaching my daughter the most valuable lesson of all, that she deserves respect, that she doesn't have to tolerate abuse from anyone, not even family, especially family. Now I know you're dying to know what happened next. Well, my curious friends, that's a story for another day. For now, let's just say life is interesting, challenging, yes, but also freeing in a way I never thought possible. I'm rediscovering who I am without Gary's expectations and Carol's constant criticism weighing me down. So if you're out there dealing with your own Gary or Carol, remember this: you're worth more than you think, you deserve more than you realize, and sometimes the most liberating thing you can do is stand up and say, enough. Edit. Holy crap, this blew up overnight. I can't believe how many of you are so invested in my drama. Your comments and messages have me alternating between laughing hysterically and ugly crying into my glass of wine. Thank you all for the support, the advice, and the truly creative suggestions about what I should do with Carol's house key. No, I'm not going to glue it inside a fish and mail it to her, although the temptation is strong. To answer some common questions, yes, I'm keeping the house. It's legally mine, and no tantrum from man-child. Gary is going to change that. No, I haven't kicked Gary out yet. We're in a strange kind of limbo where he's trying to convince me that he can change, while I'm trying to decide whether I even want him to. Carol is banned from setting foot in the house for now. I've informed her that if she shows up uninvited again, I won't hesitate to call the police. The chronic sour expression on her face when I told her was epic, trust me. To the many, many people who asked for Carol's number because she sounds attractive, seek help. Seriously, yes, I changed the locks and the security code. For those asking about my daughter, she's fine. Kids are resilient, and I'm making sure she knows none of this is her fault. In fact, she seems happier since Carol's visit stopped. What a surprise. And finally, to the person who suggested I write a book, don't tempt me. 50 Shades of Mauve. The story of a mother-in-law has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Thanks again, Reddit. Your support means more than you can imagine. I'll update when I can, but for now I have a life to live and a whole lot of mauve to paint over. Update 3. I'm back because I know how much you've been waiting for the conclusion to this story and to the wonderful marriage courage I had, if you can't detect the sarcasm. I bet you wanted to know whether Gary stayed with me or with his beloved mommy. Well, let me tell you, he never really had a choice. Although, to be fair, if he had, he probably would have chosen his mother. Luckily, not long after my last update, the divorce papers were ready to be served. Gary's face when he received them was every bit as funny as you can imagine. A mixture of shock, concern, and confusion, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. He acted like divorce was the strangest thing in the world, like he hadn't seen it coming. But really, the strange thing was that I hadn't filed for divorce much sooner. Stranger still was that I married him in the first place, or that I didn't run the first time he showed obvious signs of being a mama's boy. Along with the divorce papers came, as expected, an eviction notice. I wasn't going to let him keep living in my house a single day longer than necessary. The good news for him was that he didn't have to move very far. His new old address was exactly where everyone expected, his mother's house, of course. I made that comment thinking it would be good news for him. I mean, what could possibly be better than living with his beloved mother? Strangely, he didn't find it funny. Why? No idea. I thought he would enjoy all that emotional incest. Because that's all it was, right? Emotional. Fortunately, he didn't drag his feet about leaving. It took him only a few days to pack and move out, probably because he already had some clothes at his mother's house. Why? I don't want to know, and I don't care. Once he was gone, everything proceeded as it should. The divorce process took a few months, as these things usually do, but eventually it was finalized. I kept the house because it had never been marital property. It was an inheritance from my father, and for those asking, yes, it is possible to inherit something while the person is still alive. As for the rest of our belongings, we divided them fairly. But best of all, Gary now has to pay child support. That was a huge relief because I had started considering finding a better paying job to support my daughter and myself now that he was out of the picture. Thanks to the child support, however, we can cover the difference without worrying too much. Plus, now that his mother can no longer walk into this house or interfere in our lives, there are significant savings. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you get rid of an emotional parasite. As expected, Carol tried to come back. She wanted to come see her granddaughter, but I was very clear. If she wants to see her, she can do it during the time she spends with her father. I made it clear that there is no place for her in this house. And yes, maybe I was a little harsh, but I told her that dangerous animals aren't allowed here. The expression on her face when I said it was almost as good as Gary's when he received the divorce papers. As for custody of our daughter, we reached an agreement. She spends the week with me and weekends with her father. Although realistically, she spends most of that time with her grandmother because Gary is still living with Carol and hasn't made even the slightest attempt to move out, despite the fact that several months have passed since he left my house. As for everything else, I have to say things are much better now. Once you get rid of what's poisoning your life, everything starts to improve. It's as though I had been carrying a backpack full of rocks for years, and after finally putting it down, everything suddenly became easier. I no longer have to walk on eggshells in my own home, or live under the constant shadow of Carol's criticism. My daughter is calmer, and although having divorced parents may be difficult for her, I think she can feel the difference too without her grandmother constantly interfering in our space. Now the house finally feels like my home. And in case you were wondering, yes, I finally got rid of every trace of mauve in the house. That paint was the first thing to disappear once Gary left. Freedom has a color, and I can assure you, it isn't mauve.